Hello, good afternoon. We are now live on EE. I am Andrew Robel, the founding partner at Emerging Europe. At the beginning of March, the Heritage Foundation published its annual Index of Economic Freedom. They have been doing that for the last 27 years. And this year, 89 out of the 178 countries they looked at increased in economic freedom, 80 countries decreased, and the score of 9 countries remained pretty much the same as last year. Across emerging Europe, 8 countries are considered mostly free, 14 moderately free, and 1 is seen as mostly unfree. These are obviously the general findings, and today we're going to take a deeper dive into the research. In order to do that, I invited 2 experts to discuss the index, the trends, and the global economic context that we are witnessing at the moment. So Anthony Kim, the editor of the Index of Economic Freedom at the Heritage Foundation, joining us straight from Washington, D.C., and Marek Dietl, the CEO of the Warsaw Stock Exchange and also an economist, joining us from Warsaw. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good afternoon and good morning from Washington, D.C.
All right.
Good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are.
Exactly. All right, Anthony. Let me start with you. How economically free is emerging Europe right now? And I mean, in general, and what sort of trends have you noticed across the region?
That's a very timely question, Andrew. But let me just first say, it's great to be with you, Andrew, and with the Emerging Europe. I think last time I saw you in London before the whole crazy pandemic. And Mr. Marek Dietl, Marek, great to see you again. We shared a session last year. So it becomes out at least 6 months still, one in last year and now after 6 months. So great to be with you.
Thank you. And Andrew, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. And Andrew, your question is very timely because we're now going through a very high level of uncertainty and a lot of economic hardship induced by the pandemic. I think kind of cautiously optimistic news here is that our index, the latest edition, 21 index we just released, it shows us that it's not that bad as much as we feared. The trend line you mentioned, despite the challenges, we are slowly but surely maintaining our collective resilience, especially in Europe. I mean, if you go into country details, every country has different challenges. But overall, Europe as a continent as a whole, not EU, but Europe as a whole, I think economic freedom has been slowly yet gradually increasing. So overall, it's moderately free to mostly free. This is good news.
Marek, what is your take on that? How do you see that from your perspective? You're on the ground in emerging Europe.
So I look around here in Europe, out of my home office. But to judge the world and to understand the world, you don't have to travel that much. Immanuel Kant is the good example. He spent all his life in Kaliningrad today, at this time, and he was able to understand the world much better than, for example, I can. So basically, looking for the index. So first of all, Anthony, congratulations. Your homepage is so clear, your index is so well presented. I mean, really, a lot of work, a lot of recommendation. That it should be put the laptop with this with your service on this index should be put on every table of the policymaker in European Union, for sure. Because you said Europe as a whole is quite economically free and it's improving, but in European Union we don't see that much. There are quite great examples like Ireland. So within European Union, you can also have economic freedom. So some people say all the bureaucrats took away our economic freedom. It's not true. Ireland is a good example that you can do. But I would draw attention, our audience. I would draw the attention of our audience to the South Caucasus. You see, Georgia, number 12. If I remember correctly, Armenia 18, and Azerbaijan also top 20 or 25, whatever. And so basically, you see the old cultures, old countries coming out of the Soviet Union, but they built up quite free economies, and they I visited this region several times, and my on-site remarks are that, of course, with all the geopolitical problems and typical, you have a view, I mean, you can feel it on the street, or at least sit on the street, that this is not that rich countries with very few very rich people, guessing by the cars, for example, or houses. Some are really palace, but nevertheless, they were able to accommodate quite modern economic regulations, mainly based on the Anglo-Saxon model of the Commonwealth. So basically, I share what I would like to subscribe what Anthony just said, that Europe as a whole is performing very, very nicely. And in European Union, there are huge differences among those countries, although they belong to one economic bloc, at least theoretically.
We're going to talk about the South Caucasus a little bit later as well. I know that, and obviously Anthony is going to give us more insights here. But I know there are four major components in the index. So we're talking about the rule of law. We're talking about the government size. We're talking about regulatory efficiency and open markets. If you can look at those four and see how the situation is changing, which of these subcategories sort of have been performing better, where are the things that need improvement?
Another great question, Andrew. And really, let me put it this way. First, economic freedom is not really about just the purchasing power. It's not really about how much money you earn, you spend. This is really about institutional kind of setting for greater dynamic economic growth. So we are not here talking about just money. That's really simplistic, one-dimensional assessment. And also the Heritage Foundation Index, it's not pure academic exercise. We want to be practical. We want to be a resource to you, Andrew, and professionals like Marek, CEO of Warsaw Stock Exchange. I mean, if we are talking about macroeconomic institutional setting from our index of economic freedom perspective, somebody like Marek and a lot of investors, entrepreneurs in Poland, but also other parts of emerging Europe, they look into our index, especially in the policy areas you just talked about, rule of law, regulatory efficiency, market openness, and the size of the government. Here, I just want to emphasize that some economic reforms, they're very straightforward and even mechanical, like a tax cut, improving regulatory efficiency, market openness. I mean, it can be relatively easier. But if you look into the rule of law, it's a tricky, kind of subject. Everybody has a different approach and even opinion on what should be mean by transparency and independence. So we are dealing with a lot of complicated variables, but the bottom line is very clear. For an investor to be successful, for an entrepreneur to be successful in Poland or anywhere else, we need to have transparency and openness and economic competitiveness. That means the rule of law and the limited government and great market openness and regulatory efficiency. So on those settings, policy areas, again, I want to emphasize that despite the challenge, Europe as a whole has been moving forward, especially thanks to those countries in Baltics and the emerging Europe. I think that's the trend we found in our index of economic freedom this year.
And if we look at the current situation, we've been in facing one of the greatest challenges in the last century. I'm talking obviously about the pandemic. And if you could tell us how you see the pandemic sort of impacting this economic freedom concept.
At the outset, I want to emphasize that no matter how you see it, in the medium and long term, good economic policy is good public health policy. And good public health policy is good economic policy. So what I'm conveying to you is they are going side by side. So we cannot have good public policy without well-functioning economic system, and the other way around too. So I think the pandemic highlighted once again the long-term practical solutions are in the private sector. I mean, look at the vaccine development. This is a record speed, how they really develop the vaccine. It's all from the private sector, innovators, entrepreneurs, and many numbers of individuals and private companies that are involved. Obviously, we need government. We are not talking about complete absence of government, but the role of the government, the scope and size of the government should be very much measured and limited. And if you go beyond certain level, I think we can go extreme level like North Korea or a lot of countries in Africa or even China. But we want to have transparent and functioning economic system based on certain principles. So I think pandemic really highlighted it's very natural for people to look for solution from the government in times of uncertainty and economic hardship. But long-term solution, long-term practical solutions are coming from basically from the private sector. Again, I want to highlight great important role Merrick and the Warsaw Stock Exchange plays. I mean, that's really the incubator of ideas and solutions.
Marek, what is your take on the impact of the COVID pandemic on economic freedom?
Well, there are, of course, as always, mixed reports. I fully support what Anthony have just said about this. That I can hardly imagine good economic policy and bad public health policy. I mean, they go one by one, but you can tackle this from very different angles. You can. It's quite interesting. In the index, Sweden is number 20 and US is 21. Yeah, so completely different approach to how you service your society with when it comes to health and medical assurance and so on. But you can have a comparable economic freedom. So it is this economic freedom and pandemia and medical services that it's a kind of triangle that all the things are interrelated, but you can do them, you can find a balance between those three elements in very different way depending on your type of capitalism. So it's not that 0-1 that Scandinavian model of capitalism is somewhat better than the Anglo-Saxon or other way around. Simply within the framework of economic freedom of these institutions, and Anthony called it with capital I, so not institution as a hospital, but as an institution in society, you can find different ways to sort the things out. But this pandemic also showed what is the difference between the countries with strong institution versus not that strong institution, I would say. And it doesn't come to only numbers and this printed more money, this less money, they had this amount of fiscal stimulus. This will, I mean, of course, short term is very important, but long term, it doesn't make that huge difference. In 2 years, nobody will remember this pandemic story unless someone from your closest relatives died out of COVID or something, then you're gonna remember that, but otherwise you won't be remembering that. But institutions stay, and especially those informal institutions stay for long. It is said that you need at least 100 years to change an informal institution. And I would like to draw your attention, for example, for Greece. Yeah, Greece and Belarus, they are very close in this index, 95 and 96 spot. I don't remember who is first, who is second, but generally the same spot. So you see how detrimental for the Greek economy was the past few years when it comes to economic freedom, but also to the level of the public health, quality of the public health, net migration. There are plenty of people living in Greece. Most probably more people would live also Belarus if they were allowed to. So basically, this is the kind of institutional framework which plays extremely adversely for the countries. And there are countries which I already mentioned in South Caucasus, where by no means they are rich, but still they were able to cope with the pandemic much better. So pandemic comes and goes, and the institution stays, and usually stay for long with us.
Mm-hmm. Precisely.
I have a question regarding, the current situation, and we see obviously that the businesses have been affected significantly by COVID. What do you think is the sort of where to find the balance between trying to contain the pandemic, the virus, and at the same time allowing these businesses to actually function and grow? Because obviously in order to contain the virus, we need to enter lockdowns and limit certain activities. But where to find this balance?
If I just jump in onto another very important question, I just want to echo Marek's point here. Mm-hmm. I mean, he mentioned about institutional framework. Pandemic or any kind of economic financial crisis, they come and go. I mean, let's be very candid. This is not the first time the world as a whole, we are facing some kind of a serious economic challenge. Obviously, this time is a bit more complicated. But Andrew, on your very important question, I want to highlight, this is a process. This is not like we are turning on switch and turning off the switch. I mean, there's no such a switch, obviously. What we are trying to do is how to find most effective and practical and programmatic solutions where we can really help and empower individuals and enterprises out of this unacceptable pandemic. So we're here talking about good governance, not only in terms of political area, but also economic governance, meaning, once again, the principles, transparency and openness and flexibility and competitiveness. I mean, they are all really an important ingredients in terms of overcoming this pandemic sooner rather than later. So this is a process, but I think the real solution should be on the principled approach rather than let's just spend more money, government money. But the key question is how effective, the quality of spending. I mean, we are not talking about entire absence of any government programs or spending, but we need to make it a lot more targeted and less politically driven and really economically meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Marek, where do you think we should find this sort of balance?
Just to build up what Anthony just said, before our discussion, it's my job. I talked to the investors, and the meeting was organized by HSBC, and the question from the audience was, well, why the Polish bailout program was so successful that we have the lowest unemployment rate in the European Union after the whole crisis. And I said, I mean, the crucial thing was that it was very timely delivered, very quickly delivered via banking system. Everything was done electronically. So simply the money arrived before the companies bankrupted. And of course, it requires enormous trust because the companies were requiring the aid, just they were claiming what are the financial results. It was not possible to check, but it was impossible to check like a few 100,000 companies if they really have a drop in revenues. Okay. So what was the actually, except of very well developing banking sector who's distributing this money and very high density or high usage of electronic banking, this technical means, of course, very important. But what was the most important? It was trust. So very, very important social institution. Yeah? So simply the first time in the since transformation or even since the Second World War, Polish government trusts Polish entrepreneurs that they will give accurate numbers about the revenues, jobs, and so on, that they qualify for aid. And it played actually very well. And at the same time, I mean, just talking about our neighbors, Ukraine, I mean, for the centuries, we're combining the so-called Commonwealth of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, so we're one country, basically, and it's in the ranking by Heritage Foundation, a great ranking again, Anthony, really, on 127. And the one reason when I talk to my fellow friends in Ukraine is that simply the proliferation of corruption makes the state aid in this situation very difficult. So you take your decision about lockdown, not lockdown, and so on completely differently. If you know that you can lock down given like tourism, we locked down in winter, so there was no skiing strategy for 1 million of skiing poles, but somehow we should survive that. So no skiing this year, but at the same time, very quickly you give an aid, and then this decision is less painful. If you know that you cannot aid companies because there's no fundamental trust, there's corruption and so on, then closing the business is completely different situations. So basically, there's no one fit all approach to the balancing between opening economy, closing economy, because this depends strongly on your institution, both formal and informal. And this is why this index is so important, and why it explains Ireland survived excellently the crisis, and it's number 5 or 4, whatever in your ranking. So you see, this is exactly what Anthony is saying. The crisis come and go, but institutions stay, and I fully subscribe to what Anthony was just saying.
Anthony, would you like to comment on that, or?
Sure. I mean, I think Marek really highlighted very important example here, Poland and Ukraine. I mean, if you look at sort of emerging Europe map, Poland is not a small country. Ukraine is not a small country. I mean, here in our index, we really deal with a lot of countries in different sizes, different locations. But I think what really matters is the system and the process the country is on and the governance. I mean, we are not looking for like 100% clean, perfect governance. I mean, that cannot be built over the years. I mean, it takes time. It's always up and down process. But what matters is, as you alluded earlier, Andrew, the trend. The trend line is very important. Poland, for example, over the past 27 years, despite the challenges, despite different analysis on micro level or political level kind of assessment, the direction has been very clear. It's upward trajectory. Ukraine, unfortunately, another big country with a great potential in emerging Europe, but because of the system and because of its hostile neighbor, Russia, the country has been not fully utilizing its great potential. Once again, I have to highlight institutional settings. Some of those shortcomings of the institutional settings are coming from Ukraine themselves. I mean, the rule of law and other inefficiencies. But I think we have to be staying positive. As our index noted, the 21 index, Ukraine has been also advancing its economic freedom over the past 2 to 3 years. Yes. So trend is positive, and Poland can facilitate, in a way, through private sector engagement, as you already have. I think that's the way to go. And this is really about adding and multiplying good forces, not dividing and subtracting. So I just want to echo Marek's point. This is really, in a way, disguised blessing. This pandemic, people say, wow, I'm done. This is the end of the world, the end of the global economy. I don't see that way. This is a kind of a time for us to step back, just half step back, and let's try to find how we can move forward.
So you were saying that, I mean, you mentioned, I mean, we've been talking about Ukraine for a moment now, and at the beginning I said that one of the countries was actually seen as unfree, and I was actually speaking about Ukraine. So if you could give us, or maybe the government, the policymakers, some tips what they should focus on in order to sort of improve their performance in the index of economic freedom, what would that be?
Well, at your gentle invitation, I want to share some thoughts. I mean, obviously, I fully understand that this is not like a simple mathematical equations. I mean, this is a really very difficult, challenging policy making process. And again, I want to emphasize, Ukraine is not a small country. It's a big territory with a complicated, shortcomings and positive developments all around. But I want to offer, if I may, I think it's time to be a bit more decisive, where policymakers can make good economic decisions. I mean, earlier we talked about out of these four pillars of economic freedom: rule of law, limited government, market openness, and regulatory efficiency. Some of those areas, policy areas, are very straightforward and even mechanical. So, if I may, I think where the policymakers in Kiev can be very decisive is how to really improve regulatory efficiency, how to really advance overall market openness of Ukraine so that other countries, other investors, greater number of Polish investors may go to Ukraine to really build and make and offer some practical economic cooperation. In order to do that, I think it's very important that policymakers in Kiev, they need to be decisive and they need to do actions rather than a lot of political talking points concerning economic reforms.
So we've been also talking about Poland, obviously comparing Poland and Ukraine. And if we look at the index, well, Poland is ranked 41st in among 178 countries. Surprisingly enough, it's behind countries like, for example, Kazakhstan, which is a Central Asian country. What can Poland do, in your opinion, to improve the performance?
That's an interesting example, but I wouldn't benchmark Poland against Kazakhstan necessarily because, once again, every country has a different sort of situation, in terms of overall economic framework. Also, in our index, I have to emphasize that four pillars, rule of law, government size, regulatory efficiency, market openness, once again, under these four pillars, we have 12 different indicators.
Yes.
And we treat these 12 factors equally. So we don't say, this is more important than the other. I mean, obviously, Poland has a lot more greater institutional advantage and institutional resilience. So I wouldn't necessarily benchmark Poland against Kazakhstan. Rather, I would benchmark Poland like other countries ahead of Poland. It can be one of these European countries. It can be even, non-EU member, resilient, small economy, Switzerland. If we talk about, really competitiveness, how can we not talk about Switzerland, for example? But I think Poland is very clear, despite the challenges, despite the pandemic, I think the direction has been very welcoming. Again, 1 or 2 year analysis would not give us a full picture, but if you look at 27 years of data, our index data and others, I think you will see the positive trend that Polish economy has been making. And let's also remind us that before the pandemic, the Polish economy has been really growing almost every year, very, very impressively. I mean, that's not like out of the vacuum. I mean, people like you, Andrew, thinkers, and Marek really on the ground, like in the real jungle of the private sector. I mean, he's been helping and facilitating these private sector investors and facilitating communication between the public sector and the private sector. So this is what we should continue going forward, especially to revitalize our economic purse in the pandemic.
Marek, how would you comment on that?
Well, first of all, I would not underestimate Kazakhstan, because they did a lot of economic reforms. And actually, if you want to open a business outside of oil and gas in Kazakhstan, you have very easy way forward. So, of course, maybe Kazakhstan is not a benchmark for us for various reasons. Also, we are a democratic country and they are not, but obviously from every country we can learn. And
Sure,
this
great
is
point.
exactly what I want to put forward, because Poland underperforms in the business freedom, for example. That's for sure, and tax burden. That's definitely we have relatively low. We have relatively high taxes. And it goes especially for sales tax or VAT taxes, so tax on consumption are relatively high. We have also this business freedom is in many aspects still quite limited. The bureaucratic burden for running a business can still be improved in Poland. For example, measured by the time hours spent by the entrepreneurs for sorting out their tax issues. So this is just a good indicator for that. We performed quite good in the rule of law. We improved. We have a kind of downturn in 17, 18, and 19, but in 20 we again improved. So it's good because we have very controversial juridical reforms in Poland. But it seems that they started to play well for Poland, for the efficiency of the judicial system, what is quite important. And coming back shortly to Ukraine, of course, Ukraine is improving a lot and changing. But what Anthony also mentioned, there should be a spillover effect. So we have to improve gradually all the institutions. But if you even make a great one institution, but you're surrounded by malfunctioning other institutions, it won't survive long. And the secret sauce of Polish transformation is that on the one hand, we have, I would call it patchwork capitalism. So we took one institution from the Anglo-Saxon world, we put we had German advisors for this reform, so we have quite a German solution. But more or less, all the governments since 1989 were focused on reforming, improving some institutions. Of course, the center of gravity was different. Sometimes there was more talking than doing, but others were doing more than talking. So basically, there was a gradual improvement. And the problem of Ukraine, and to some extent also in Kazakhstan, that in Kazakhstan, when you have a great conversion from idea to implementation, there are some islands of really great corporate low taxation, many nice things, investment in infrastructure, financial infrastructure, many things are great, but there are some things obviously missing. And in Ukraine, it's unfortunately that they were improving one thing, but then the other things were malfunctioning. So there's one thing which was improved that was deteriorating. So they are trying to build up with another thing. So unfortunately, more stamina and systematic approach to improving institutions actually played better. What also shows that freedom in Belarus is actually better economic. What is counterintuitive, because the people on the streets are taken from the streets and put into prison in Belarus. But I can tell you from talking with our issuers on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, actually, when you have decent business, you invest and you fulfill. And I'm talking not about corruption, but just fulfilling some business rules, and you don't mix up with the politics. You are really doing fine. You are really doing fine. So basically, it's a trick that some results of the study are counterintuitive, but actually you have to dig deeper and understand them. because they are really informative to the policymakers, and there are some takeouts and things Poland should definitely improve. One of those thing is, I mean, just to make it clear, we are just short of 0.4% from the next stage, from this green stage of relatively free. So we are always dreaming on crossing this bar, and we share this gap of around 0.5% with few other countries. So that doesn't have to be. We do not have to do much to cross the bar next time, but it's really pays should be paying back. So we are, as Anthony also correctly stated, that the direction in Poland is clear. There are ups and downs, but the direction is not is. I mean, there is a wide political consensus for the direction of the of improving of the Polish economy, including economic freedom. But at the beginning, it was much easier, and now it's getting tougher when there are some things to be improved where you cannot copy the solution from the other countries. You have to invent your own way of doing things, and always, if you do any running sports, you know that it's if there's someone in front of you, it's much easier to run when you are first one.
So when we look a little bit broader in the region, and speak about the sort of trying to invent your own way, maybe let's look at the country that is at the top in our region, and I'm talking about Estonia, of course. Do you think that this technological element, e-government as well, plays an important role in being or in granting this economic freedom?
From my perspective, at least from the index related, I think I must say yes, it's one of the important factor. But also I want to highlight that I think really we're on the same page, Marek and Andrew. I think in a way, I mean, obviously we didn't coordinate our message at all, but I think we're talking about really the same principles here. I think Marek and Andrew, you both highlighted the importance of principle here. Every country presents unique lessons and opportunity. And obviously in our index, we are not talking about model A is über alles model. You know, we are not talking about it. Poland has its own model. It's improving. Ukraine has its own. Kazakhstan too. So every country has its own process and struggle. And speaking of Kazakhstan, look at other Central Asian countries. Now, let's put that in the context of Estonia and Baltics, as you mentioned, going beyond Estonia. Obviously, Estonia has been taking certain advantage of being small, but not just being small, but being very resilient, flexible, and open. I mean, the big difference between Estonia and Ukraine, if I may, despite the challenging external situation, you know, it's hostile neighbor of Russia. I mean, because of the size, or maybe because of the process, the country, the two countries been on, the internal consensus and national debate, Estonia has been able to really advance at a faster rate. So I think Estonia has its own unique advantage, but the bottom line is very clear. As our index shows, the country has been very committed to maintaining a high level of openness and transparency, and technology and e-governance. That's an effective tool for Estonia. They are not using technology to monitor or control its citizens. They want to help. They want to facilitate efficiency, especially regulation related. So they are really smartly using the technology and IT, keeping in mind, the importance of its security. So I think this is an important dimension we have to talk about.
Marek, how do you think technology?
Well, Estonia is a tremendous country. I visited it several times for giving lectures, and it's a great country with great people. They have, I call it, a very high level of adaptive IQ, which comes from their history. In the around 700 years ago, the Teutonian Order took over this part of the world. It was called at this time Inflanty. Then, after defeating the Teutonian Order, Poland took over that, and until the partition of Poland, so end of the 18th century, Polish king was using the term that he's a king of today's Estonia, and this time Inflanty. So it's even, there is a proverb in Polish that when you want to give something which you don't believe belong to you, you say you offer someone Inflanty, so meaning today's Estonia, because then there was constant fight between Russians, Swedes, and Poles around this region, because it was extremely rich region with the people who were running businesses very smoothly and very strong craftsmen and very good in trade and so on. But the control was changing all the time, but they still were doing business very well, independently if they were controlled of Russia, Sweden, or Poland over the centuries. So they adopted to many different situations very effectively. They had very nice mix of population coming from various countries, actually. There is extremely genetic mix, actually. You can find Jews, Germans, Poles, Swedes, of course, Russians, or whatever. I mean, all the possibilities. So it also is quite helpful. And even under the Soviet Union, I can just give you an anecdote, just to give you an idea how adaptive are Estonians. So late 80s, the perestroika already started, but still nobody expect communists to fall. With my parents, I live in Austria, and I realized that the table tennis beds by Swedish company Stiga are extremely expensive in Austria. And I realized that they can be relatively cheaply bought in the communist countries, because Estonians somehow arrange a license from Sweden, from capitalist Sweden, to produce those table tennis beds. And my first business was getting somehow those beds from Poland and selling to my schoolmates in Austria with, markup of 300% effectively. And this shows that they are very good craftsmen, because quality was excellent. They somehow were really well adaptive. So they somehow arranged with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union so they can get this license. And they were exporting this in the Soviet bloc, those beds. And they were also getting all the materials, what was the shortage of materials, and they were very good in producing. And I think the e-government in Estonia is not the cause, but the result. Actually, the cause is that they adopt to the new technologies, different situations very efficiently, very quickly. And of course, what Anthony mentioned, if the full country is smaller in terms of number of inhabitants than the Warsaw, of course, it's easier to be managed. But basically, even if they were a bigger country, they will be for sure very successful. I mean, I'm sure up to 10 million, I'm very sure that they will be. Because they are simply very smart, they have this adaptive IQ. And what we can learn from them is that actually those species in this evolution, social evolution, which adopt very well, are actually adopting economic freedom. It should learn other species who are less adaptive, but maybe there is something in there. So again, I don't think we should not mix up cause and result. So I think the cause is that they are extremely smart and adaptive, and the result is their technological progress and their economic freedom, because they realize that the best way to run a relatively small country is to be open and to leave a lot of freedom for the economy. Of course, you should be aware of the situation like money laundering by Russian mafia in Estonian banking sector. So sometimes. And it's funny story, because actually they were they were, inverted comma, doing asset management for rich families in the neighborhood countries since like 16th century or something, because they perceive like it's kind of safe haven. So actually they have long track record of being a center for this for different financial operations. But leaving this aside, of course, it's a tremendous country. which can live very peacefully and in great friendship with all the neighborhood countries, including Russia, by the way. So they have still very good links with Russia. So respect for Estonia, and all other nations should learn from them how to adapt to the challenge of the modern world.
So one more question about the leaders. We were talking about them sort of at the beginning of our chat. We were talking about the South Caucasus countries, and we mentioned Georgia, but also Armenia and Azerbaijan. How would you explain their success in economic freedom?
Again, very good, natural, organic question as we continue our discussion. And I want to say the following, because Marek used, once again, a keyword, and that applies to Armenia, Azerbaijan, and all others. Adaptability. It's very important. The world is not like a standing still place, up and down. It's always changing. But countries with a good institutional setting, good governance, they are very good at adapting new reality, new economic reality. That means higher level of adaptability, that's economic resilience, and that's overall economic competitiveness. So we are creating this very virtuous cycle, kind of repeating itself through good governance. And I think that's what's happening in Azerbaijan and Armenia to a certain degree. Obviously, it's not an overnight process, but, Marek really wonderfully highlighted the process that Estonia has been going through. That's why Estonia has been in the league of the top line. In terms of Azerbaijan and Armenia, they are on a similar, but not quite same trajectory. So I think what we are seeing here is year by year, again, they are putting together their own reform package, whether that's a regulatory efficiency or market openness. They are trying to improve themselves. And perhaps they also recognize their existing shortcomings. So I think that it's a very good case to watch. I mean, we do know that, it's not always friendly between, Armenia and Azerbaijan due to certain issues. But when it comes down to economic policy area, when it comes to economic arena, I think things can be different. And here, I think that countries like, Georgia, it can offer some good sort of examples and even facilitation, because after all, Georgia's success, it can be Azerbaijan's success, because this is a regional bloc, and Armenia is not an exception to that. And that goes obviously to other countries in emerging Europe that Andrew and your team, you guys have been very closely following. I think this is a really kind of important economic area. I mean, we talk about EU, but this is a human-made institutional bloc. But if you look at emerging Europe, this is a kind of a natural, geographical, kind of God-given setting. And if we can just add these, good momentums. And also I want to talk about 3Cs initiative out of this, because that's another good initiation put together by like-minded willing countries in the region, how to really collectively improve its connectivity and infrastructure. I mean, what better way can there be in terms of attracting greater private investment and move forward as a region, not as another institutional man-made setting, kind of sharing this unique setting, 3Cs. That's why we say 3Cs initiative. And I think this is something we have to pay close attention to. And I hope that Washington can facilitate the discussions too.
Okay, that's a very good point. I have my last question now. I can see that we lost Marek in the meantime. He might actually come back. But my final question to you, Anthony, how do you think the concept of economic freedom might evolve, or will it evolve at the end of the day? We're looking at the huge technological advancements. We're talking about various trends taking place around the world, like protectionism, for example. We might even see another future pandemic. So how do you see that concept evolving going forward?
Here, I'll be a bit cautiously negative, meaning
Okay.
this is a constant struggle. This is a constant battle. I mean, this is not like yes, we won freedom. No, it's going to be an evolving, once again, process. And we cannot just say, our homework is done, so I'm done. I'm going to just enjoy. It never works that way. It's so obvious to you, Andrew, me, and to Merrick. I mean, why private investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, innovators, they always try something new. Sometimes they fail. Maybe more than often they fail. But in the end, their persistence, their commitment to greater innovation, greater dreams, that makes our world better. So to me, on your question, Andrew, that's very important question. This is an important struggle. This is a very, very, very important battle we have to fight. There's no permanent victory or permanent defeat on this battle. There's always constant battles. That's why we have to remind ourselves the importance of openness, transparency, and overall economic governance.
All right. I can see that actually. I think Marek joined us for a second, but he dropped out again. Thank you very much, Anthony, for this. Oh, let's see if we can still connect with Marek at the end. No, I don't think it will be possible. No. All right, Anthony, thank you very much for joining us, and obviously, Marek, thank you for joining us for the vast section of the chat. And yes, like Anthony said, we need to continue fighting for this economic freedom. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you, Andrew. And I welcome your audience to our Index website for greater information. And also, Andrew, I want to highlight, I really like the name Emerging Europe. This is a process once again. This is not like, our job's done. We have to continue to make sure that Europe and as a whole, the world as a whole, once again, emerging in a greater, more dynamic way. So thank you for hosting today's discussion.
Thank you.